guys, and welcome back to Kenneth Thomas's Naya Nuki, the Shoshone girl who ran. Now, remember, we've been paying close attention to the story so that you can restate the question and answer with a complete sentence at the end. If you don't know the answer at the end, go back and rewatch the story. Let's get started with Chapter 3, The Long March East. Naya Nuki wondered where she was being taken. What would happen to her when they did arrive at the end of this awful journey? Again, she thought about her escape. When the time was right, she would gain her freedom some way, somehow. That night, all the prisoners were tied tightly with leather thongs. Guards were on duty all night to watch the prisoners. Naya Nuki could not get to sleep. She remembered the stories told to her before her capture. Prisoners were taken far away and sold as slaves, never to return to their people. She told herself that first night that no matter how far they took her, and no matter what her captors did to her to stop her, someday she would escape and return to her home in the mountains. Naya Nuki woke often that night. Her wrists and ankles ached from the tightly tied strips of hide. When the long night finally ended and morning came, the guards untied the prisoners. It was hard even to stand up at first. Her legs were numb, sore, and stiff. Soon her circulation improved. It felt good just to be able to move again. Breakfast was more buffalo meat and camas roots. Naya Nuki drank lots of cold water with her food. Before the sun came over the eastern mountains, the march began anew. Prisoners were reminded that to try to escape would mean sure death. As before, the prisoners were kept separate. Each one had to walk next to a rider, which made it impossible to talk to the others. Feet that were still sore from the day before again felt like jabs of the densely prickly pear. But the pace was slower, and some of the cactuses could be avoided. Naya Nuki spent much of her time looking in every direction to memorize landmarks, places to hide, and the best route to follow after escaping. She knew someday she would pass this way on her trip home. For now, escape was still too dangerous. The prisoners were all watched every minute. Naya Nuki saw how their route followed the great river, not too closely, because the river twisted and turned through the valley like a giant snake. To follow the river's edge would mean traveling great distances around each turn. One after another, Naya Nuki saw that the route that she was walking as a prisoner was sometimes more than a mile from the great river. Day after day, the routine was the same. The prisoners were up before daylight. They were forced to walk while they were watched closely. They gathered wood for fires, hauled water, and baked camas root. Breakfast was always dried buffalo meat and camas roots. Naya Nuki felt little emptiness inside as the journey took the group out to the mountains and onto the wide open prairie. She so wanted to escape before they were too far from the mountains. However, there was no chance. The guards were always watching the prisoners' every move, and could easily track down anyone who tried to escape. Soon great herds of buffalo were seen everywhere. Now there was fresh meat for every meal. Naya Nuki had never seen such great numbers of buffalo. Never before had she had so much food. Never had she seen so many precious buffalo skins. The buffalo hides made the very best and the strongest moccasins. Buffalo hide clothes and blankets were all the best of all. They were warmer, more comfortable, and lasted 3 times as long as the deer and elk hide. Soon Naya Nuki could no longer see the mountains. The prairie seemed to be growing larger and larger. Still the desire to escape burned inside her. She could see for miles across the vast rolling landscape. The river was always in sight. Cottonwood trees and willows lined the banks of the great river. In some places at the river's edge, steep cliffs rose above the water. High bluffs were carved out here and there. Naya Nuki remembered one day on the long journey as one of her happiest since being captured. It was the day that all the prisoners were allowed to come together once again. They were permitted to talk to each other for the first time since becoming prisoners. They were even allowed to sleep at night without being tied up. There were still many guards watching their every move. There were daily warnings that to try to escape would mean death. Naya Nuki and Sacagawea talked every chance they had. They were so happy to be together again. When the guards were not near enough to hear, Naya Nuki talked to Sacagawea about escape. For the first time, Sacagawea talked about the impossibility of escape. She talked about how far they would have to travel to get back to the mountains. She wondered if they would ever be able to get back to their people. If they could reach the mountains, Naya Nuki could see that Sacagawea might not want to try to escape at all. Even this did not change Naya Nuki's mind. She would escape even if she had to do it alone. As she thought about it, the word alone rang in her mind. It filled her with fear at first, but the more she thought about escaping alone, the more she got used to the idea. Then she thought that maybe other prisoners could make an escape, and then she would go with them, even if Sacagawea didn't. The thought of leaving her best friend Sacagawea made her heart heavy with sadness. They would probably never, ever see each other again. Naya Nuki continued to watch for landmarks and tried to remember every new one. Along with many others, the war party had already passed. She looked for large islands in the great river, high bluffs, waterfalls, large streams that flowed into great rivers, and anything that was unusual along the way. If Naya Nuki were to make a successful escape, she would have to know the land, the best hiding places, and the safest route to follow on her long journey back to the mountains. The great river would be help to lead her home, but Naya Nuki would have to know where she was and how far she had to go before reaching the mountains. One night in the deep darkness, Naya Nuki and Sacagawea lay whispering softly while the guard was furthest from them. "I've been watching the land around us as we walk each day. There are many places to hide, and much tall grass to conceal us as we travel home after our escape. I know we can do it together, Sacagawea. There is nothing that will stop me from escaping and going back to our mountains. When the right day comes, we shall escape. I know we can do it. We must do it, you and I," whispered Naya Nuki. "Escape is impossible now. They watch us all the time, day and night. If we did escape, they would be sure to follow us on horses, and death would come to us. Great bears, wolves, and other enemy warriors would find us before we got to the mountains. Now we have plenty of food and are safe from harm. We will talk about escape another day. Now we talk for nothing," answered Sacagawea softly. Naya Nuki was saddened by Sacagawea's words. Naya Nuki felt lonely and abandoned. She talked to Sacagawea about other things and then lay silently looking up at the bright stars on this cold, clear night. She thought about Sacagawea's words for a long time. If Sacagawea did not want to escape, Naya Nuki would go alone. She could travel swiftly alone. She could run fast if she had to. She could hide well in the time of danger. She could climb trees to escape wild animals. She could find her own food. She could do it alone. She would do it alone if no one else would go. She lay awake for hours thinking about escape. She enjoyed her thoughts and slept soundly when sleep finally did come. After each day's long march, the captives were forced to erect shelters, go for water, gather food, cook meals, and scrape the hides of the freshly killed buffalo. When finally their work was done, they were allowed to go to the stream to rinse the dust and dirt from their bodies and to eat their evening meal. Mosquitoes were thick on the prairie, and their bites itched continually. The prickly pear was gone now, and Indian roads made travel easier. Several times on the journey, the other Indian hunting parties were met. Indian encampments were visited, and endless talks held. The prisoners knew their long march was nearly over when tribes of Indians came by who dressed like their captors and spoke the same language. After 41 sleeps, the long trek ended at the village of Long Houses. Here lived several hundred Minnetar Indians. Their long houses were made of large timbers and earth. They stretched for great distances. Smoke rose from holes at the roof and the regular intervals along the buildings. Naya Nuki had never seen such places to sleep and cook. She took in all the strange sights, smells, and sounds of this huge village. Never before had she seen so many people in one place. There was great excitement when the war party came into view. All stood looking at the prisoners and many fine horses taken in battle. There was much shouting and loud talking as people circled around and around the weary travelers. Children pushed closer for a better look. Dogs barked and raced in and out among the crowd. Naya Nuki was frightened and wondered what would happen next in this dreadful place and among these strangers. Soon the crowd quieted down and the people began to go back to their regular activities. That night a great feast was held. After the food came wild celebration with large fires, dancing, tales of the battle, and much rhythmic chanting by all. Naya Nuki and the other prisoners were given food and put into a section of a long house at the very end of the building. A guard stood by the only door that led to the outside. He seemed unhappy about having to stand guard while the others celebrated. Naya Nuki ate well and was very well tired from the long march. Even with the deafening noise of the celebration nearby, she fell asleep on a skin mat on the floor of this huge, long house. When the celebration ended and was all quiet, Naya Nuki woke up. She had dreamed she was with her mother back in her own village. Naya Nuki loved her mother. She longed to see her again, to help her with her work, to be near her, and to show her the love she had felt for her. Yes, Naya Nuki would plan her escape, and she would carry it out successfully. She would return to those she loved. No enemy, no wild animal, and no hardship could hold her back. Naya Nuki remembered the time her baby brother died. She had watched her mother bury the baby's cradle, which is the Shoshone custom. She had watched as in grief her mother cut all her own hair off and took a sharp stone and gashed her legs until the blood flowed freely from many wounds. Naya Nuki saw the great love of a mother for her child. Naya Nuki loved her mother more than anyone else in the world. No, nothing would stop Naya Nuki from escaping. She would return home or die trying. And that will do it for the end of chapter 3 of Naya Nuki, the Shoshone girl who ran. Now make sure you answer those questions and use those complete sentences that we've been practicing. Make sure you click submit and have a great rest of your day. We'll see you tomorrow.